From the News Channel 8 studios, let's talk live with your hosts, Natasha Barrett and Melanie Hastings.
Boy, am I glad I don't have to do this anymore. Midterms. They are around the corner for so many college students, which means now is a good time for students to begin studying. Education expert Ann Dolin is also the author of Homework Made Simple, Tips, Tools, and Solutions. She's here to talk about the science behind studying. And this is pretty interesting because you hear different things, and for different people it's like, oh, you know, this works for me. Right. This works for me. Right. But tell us about this. There's actually research that says what works better for the human brain.
It's true. And you know, Natasha, it's not just college students. It's also high school, middle school, and elementary kids too. So here's what we know. We know that 84% of students study the wrong way. They study just by rereading their notes, the textbook, and that is not at all efficient.
Okay.
It's actually much better. The #1 way to study for an exam is to make yourself a practice test. And that means to try to anticipate, well, what will the teacher have on that exam? And then create your own test and then go through and do the problems and solve it. Then you know what you really don't know. And
what about in college? You have the textbooks and you think back to college and you did all that highlighting. Did they do highlighting anymore? It's back when I did it. Highlighting in the books, and this is the key word. Is that okay?
It's okay. It's not fabulous.
Okay.
Here's the problem. A lot of kids get highlighter happy and they just they highlight everything. Before you know it, the whole page is bright pink. If you want to highlight, the best idea is to read a paragraph or a section and say to yourself, what's important here, and then go back and highlight those points, because you really don't know what's important until you've read it. But on average, highlighting actually is not really that effective. It's better to read and take notes in the margins as you read.
Let's talk about where you study. You know, in your room, on your bed. You always hear on your bed's the worst spot because you can't go back to sleep because it's like a stressful spot. Some people like just dead silence in the library. What's the best place?
It really depends. I mean, certainly each student is different, but what we do know is it's best to have a few locations to study. We used to think that you should study the same place day in and day out, and actually that's not as effective as having different locations. So maybe one day it's in the dining room, next day at the library, the third day in your home office. But you really should have many different places. The brain works best with novelty. So anytime you're changing location to study, you're going to remember more.
Switch it up. Okay, that makes sense. Let's talk about these little friends of ours, which, you know, like my phone never leaves my side. Good or bad thing to have around you when you're trying to study?
Not great, actually.
Figured.
Sorry.
Yeah, I figured.
You know, what the research says now is that it's better to have a tech break, because what a lot of kids do is they'll have their phone in one hand and they'll be studying as they're checking their texts or their Twitter feed. But it's actually more effective to study for 20 minutes and then check your phone. The phone should actually be on the other side of the room and not in your hand in a separate location, so you have to get up and check it. And you're going to be more effective that way than trying to multitask. Because what we now know is science shows that there is no such thing as multitasking. What you're really doing is task switching. You're just doing it very quickly.
Right. It's so interesting. Just like they say not to have, you know, the phone by the side of your bed. To have a free zone from that, because it does affect our sleep. It does affect a lot of things if it's right there and we hear it dinging, you know. There's an update on something that's distracting you from whatever you're trying to do, like sleep or studying. There's also research when it comes to location, where you do your studying. Where is the best place?
It really differs for each student. You know, sometimes I've been to Starbucks and I've seen people...
I said where, I meant when.
You meant when?
I meant when.
Well, let me tell you where too. That's okay, we can talk about where. Because sometimes people do need a very quiet place, but other people really get energy from the hum of a busy area. So some kids, they say, I study best at Starbucks, or I study best in a study group when there's lots of people around. But when...
Yeah, let's get to when.
You know, here's the thing about studying. A lot of students will do homework, but they won't invest time in studying. And so the better idea is to actually do your studying before you even start your homework. But what you also want to do is right before you go to bed, take about 10 minutes and review what you've studied, because sleep lays down learning, and sleep is actually a super effective study tool. So what you want to do is review that information right before you go to bed, because your brain is actually more active when you're sleeping than when you're awake, and it will rehash all that information as you sleep.
So maybe there is something to putting the book underneath the pillow. as the old saying goes, right?
Yep.
What about other things of, you know, eating while you study, having some caffeine while you study? You know, most people that pull all-nighters will get the Mountain Dew or, you know, the Red Bull. What do you think about that?
Well, you know, there is some research that shows that having some glucose booster is helpful. Yeah, certainly for students, having apple juice or a Gatorade, something sugary while you're studying can be helpful. But we also know soda and coffee.
And actually, I have to cut you off right there because the president's about to speak, but we got to all of our points.